Hi there, I'm Peter Millard, and in the workshop this week we're going to talk about Festool's Domino. Why now? Well, because it's about time. It's coming up next. So I bought my Festool Domino in 2008 as an ex-demonstrator. It was the 2006 model. I think they came to the UK in 2007. I can't quite remember, to be honest. But it was one of those enabling tools, like the track saw before it and the vacuum, the extractor. It enabled me to do far more than I would have been able to do otherwise. And because of that, it's become sort of the backbone, really, of my carpentry and cabinet making business. Certainly every cabinet, every carcass, every wardrobe, every set of shelves pretty much revolves around me using the Domino as a jointing method. And because of this, when I started doing YouTube, I started getting a lot of questions about the Domino. Mostly, in fact, the most asked question is, what's that black thing attached to your Domino, and why are you using it upside down? Well, this is a dummy plate from Seneca Woodworking. We'll get into why I've got that a little bit later on. And the second most asked question is, have you ever done a video about the Domino? And my stock answer to that is no, I never bothered. Because, to be honest, it's a 10-year-old tool. There's not much more to say about it, really. All the videos have been done. But I decided to do one now because, for one reason and another, I think more people are going to start picking up the Domino fairly soon or fairly recently, or have done fairly recently. And it's worth doing an up-to-date video on. I've had mine for 10 years, almost 11. It's probably worth doing a quick sort of recap of what it is and what it does. So let's just recap quickly on what the Festool Domino is, just in case you've been under a rock or if you're new to Festool or to woodworking. Festool's Domino came about 10 or 12 years ago, and it's a handheld portable power tool for making loose tenons, or more specifically, more accurately, for making mortises that loose tenons can fit into. What's a loose tenon? Sometimes called a floating tenon. Well, unlike a traditional mortise and tenon, has a tenon fashioned out of one part of the stock and a corresponding mortise that it fits into. And yes, I did make this one myself, thank you very much. First one in 42 years. A floating tenon essentially has a mortise in both of the pieces and a loose or floating tenon that would fit between them. Now, floating tenons or loose tenons have been around for a long, long time. It's exactly the same principle that I use when I make my shaker-style panel doors. The two grooves on either side of the rail and stile form a mortise, and the loose tenon just is pushed in with glue and binds the whole thing together. The Festool Domino was the first machine of its kind to be able to make that sort of slot that a loose tenon would fit into, and it does that in a very clever and very simple way. So the Domino kind of comes in two parts. There's the body and the fence. We'll split these apart for now. The whole assembly. The body itself is just like a small router, basically. A bit like the old MKF 500 or the current MKF 700, the horizontal sort of trim routers that Festool do. But instead of just spinning a bit, instead of just rotating it, it actually waggles from side to side. By varying the degree of waggle or oscillation means you can vary the width of the slot that you're cutting by changing the bit from anything from 4mm, 5, 6, 8 or 10mm. You can obviously vary the thickness of the mortise for different thickness of tenons. And of course, by varying the extent of the plunge, you can vary how deep the mortise is as well, from anywhere between 12 and 28mm. So it's a very versatile, very convenient way of joining all kinds of different things very, very accurately. So given that one of the key selling points of the Domino was accuracy, it's quite ironic then that some of the early ones, and mine is one, suffered from what were called fence drift. So over time, this fence would shift slightly. So on a long run of Dominoes, you could find that the position wasn't exactly held absolutely perfectly. And of course, this is exacerbated by the fact that you make one plunge from one side and another from the other. Any sort of drift, any sort of slight misalignment is doubled over the length of the Domino run. So this became enough of an issue that a couple of bright sparks over in the US called Seneca Woodworking started making these. This is a dummy plate, and basically as well as taking the fence out of the equation by using the domino upside down, it actually puts the domino exactly in the center of a 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch piece of board. Now obviously sheet materials and sheet goods only have a nominal thickness. They do make a metric 18 and 12 mil now. I'm not really sure whether that's worth having. But one of the oddities of the Festool Domino, it doesn't actually have a setting on the fence for 18 mil stock. Anyway, we'll get back to the dummy plate because I still use that for another reason. We'll get back to that a little bit later on. But let's have a quick look at how the domino works and how you go about changing the settings. So in terms of use, it's actually pretty straightforward. You've got a locking lever on the side to raise the height of the fence. You've got presets on the left-hand side here for 16, 20, 22, 25, 28, 36 and 40 mil, all the useful sizes except the one that you mostly need, of course. And then you've got an angled fence as well with presets at all the usual places. Most of the time it's going to be 0 or 90, but sometimes it's useful to be able to put a domino into a mitre. The plunge depths are set on the side here, and it's a stepped and locking system. So 12, 15, 20, 25 and 28. Obviously you can use offset mortises, so you could do 12 in one face and 28 in another and use a 40 mil domino, for example. But far and away the most common domino that I use is the 5x30. In fact, when I bought mine, it just came with a 5 mil bit, and I used that for years and years and years before I got the rest of the bits. To change the width of the domino mortise, there's a dial up here with the narrow, mid and wide settings. You are only supposed to do this while the domino is actually running. That kind of goes against the grain, but they do recommend it, so I won't mess with it now. The narrow setting is the same width as the domino. The mid setting is plus 6 mil, and the wide setting is plus 10 mil. If you need to change the bit, there's a little release lever here. You can use the spanner that comes with it, or a screwdriver. That just unclips. And there's a spindle lock button on the side here. And then just use the spanner. It's an 8 mil to undo the bit and change it. And fitting is exactly the same in reverse. Now, it never bothered me particularly that the domino wouldn't centre exactly in an 18 mil board, but if it does, what you can do is just loosen the fence off, go to the 16 mil preset, and then use a 1 mil packer underneath when the fence goes down, whoops, and then lock it. And that will give you the 9 mil setting on the fence that you need to centre the domino in an 18 mil board. Just bear in mind, of course, that the 18 mil is only nominal. It won't be exactly centred. You still need to pay attention to the reference surfaces. Now, when it comes to putting the domino where you want it to be, there's a couple of ways of doing this. Or the easy way, if you're putting the mortise close to the edge of your board, of your workpiece, is to use the little sprung pins or paddles. This is an early machine, so it's got little sprung pins. The later machines, I think from about 2010 or 2011 onwards, have little paddles. They reference against the edge of your workpiece and put a domino mortise exactly 37 mil, the centre of the domino mortise, 37 millimetres away from the mortise edge. The other way to do it is just the old-fashioned way, and to use what they call the sight guide in the centre here, and just align that with a pencil mark. Now, one thing I would recommend that you do, whether you're buying a fresh out of the box brand new machine or one that's been previously enjoyed, is to calibrate that sight guide so that you know it's absolutely spot on, because remember, you turn the machine around by 180 degrees. This is really, really easy to do. You just take a couple of pieces of board, butt the edges together, draw a pencil line across the two nice and straight, and then separate them, and with your domino set to the right depth and the narrowest setting, plunge a mortise into each side on the pencil mark, and then dry fit them back together with a domino in between, and that pencil line should be exactly a line on both sides. Now if that pencil line doesn't line up, there's a couple of little Torx screws on the sight guide. You can loosen those off and just move the sight guide left or right very slightly, then repeat the test until you get that line dialed in really nicely. What you should be shooting for is something like I've got on mine here, an absolutely perfectly straight line at the narrowest setting.